This is the lecture for Chapter 3. In this one, we're going to look at depth and movement in the frame, where we begin to look at these issues. It's interesting that depth is such an important dimension, an important aspect of framing and creating movies, that there's a chapter all by itself here. And here's the reason, I think, is it follows an earlier line of reasoning on this, and that is that media is an extension of our senses. That media is one of the ways that we make contact with the world, the physical world. A term I've used in the past is embodiment, right? And embodiment and physicality is not simply things that we see, and not just simply colors and lines and shapes, and not just simply sounds, but the actual space in which those things occur and the physicality of those things in space. You know, space and dimension is a very human part of us. And the perception of space in 3 dimensions is a very deeply important part of human experience. We crave embodiment, and we crave depth, dimension, space, and mass in our experiences, either directly in the world or through media. So the history of media has been a history not only of evoking sights and sounds, but within sights and sounds, evoking the illusion of space, because media primarily has been a 2 or 3D phenomena, and I mean 3D in the sense that height, width, and time. There is the dimension of audio. But within visual media, we have been a bit delayed in evoking really useful, general purposely useful evocations of 3D in our media. And the reason is because of technical issues and aesthetic issues. But the desire for full dimensionality is really there because it's a fundamental human desire. Currently, you'll see, you know, the efforts in 3D cinema experiences, 3D television, and so on. Interestingly, in audio, we've already gotten really far in creating dimensional audio with stereo, which has been around for many decades, 5.1 surround sound, which has been around for quite a while. So actually, in sound space, we can do quite well. It's in visual space that we're still working to coming up with some universally applicable approach to render 3D on a wide scale. So currently we're still in the realm of 2D evocation of 3D space, and there are a number of different mechanisms, ways that we can evoke 3D-ness, we can evoke space and mass and so on. And I want to cover 4 of them that the book covers. Overlap, using diagonal composition, using selective focus, and also then movement, various kinds of movement. So let me look at this now. So overlap makes sense. You overlap objects within the frame to produce space. And that also offers one the opportunity to prioritize that space. Things that are in front tend to be more important. Things that are behind tend to be less focused on and less important expressively in the frame. So overlapping is one of those fundamental methods of creating space. Interestingly, overlap can create distance, and it can also create closeness. So overlap in the context of more space can create intimacy between 2 things that are closely overlapped. And overlap can also create, obviously by definition, creates sort of covering up of other things. And if there's mists or atmospherics or landscape or other things that are obfuscating other things, there's the dimension of creating mystery and so on. So overlapping comes with a lot of expressive potential with it. So the second sort of mechanism or approach to creating space in a 2D dimension is using diagonals in composition. In this case, sort of extreme perspective, right? Looking down this long street. If you're an artist and you're learning how to draw in perspective is one of those early skills that you try and master. But you also see diagonals used not just simply in terms of deep focus, single perspective views, but also diagonals through interior or exterior spaces. So the stacking up of diagonals. In this case, looking through an office sort of on a diagonal axis, and you can see layering and diagonals here. Another mechanism we touched on earlier on in the previous chapter was the use of focus to create attention, but another byproduct of shallow focus is the creation of depth. So if something in the foreground is in focus and the things in the background are out of focus, depending upon how out of focus they are, you can create a real separation and sense of depth from those things that are in the foreground. And then the last bundle of sort of tricks for creating depth all fall under the category of movement. And the first is movement within the frame. And this is one of the oldest methods of creating depth in a frame, is getting the subjects moving around in the space of the frame. You see this used most effectively in sort of classic music videos where there are big dance productions, right? Where the choreographer is very conscious of moving figures through the space, crossing the frame, moving back, creating and articulating the deep space of the frame. Another way of using movement is camera movement, and that's a little bit newer, although it's been going on for many decades. The idea of getting cameras freed from their stable mounts and getting them moving around your subject. And you may be aware that there are constant innovations in creating more varied ways of creating movement. Cameras that are mobile mounted on cars, on cranes, steady cams that are carried or ridden on other vehicles, cameras that fly over sporting events on wires and cables, cameras mounted on aerial vehicles. And this is all to satisfy the human desire to see articulated, rich space. And camera movement is one way of pulling us and articulating and revealing space. The last method I'm going to talk about is actually an older method. This is one of our earliest ways in audiovisual media to create and evoke space, and it has to do with simply editing. By continuity editing, and I'm going to talk about that in future chapters, by editing shots that are framed and carefully composed in a certain way, there is the illusion of being able to see a set and a location and a collection of actions of people from multiple angles. And if you do it well and consistently, then it becomes transparent, and to the viewer, it feels like you are witnessing and feeling the full space and depth of that scene. Movement through editing. And that's going to be something we're going to talk about soon. And really look at some sophisticated tricks that have been developed over the years. Thanks.